Good morning, everybody. So I am up at 6:30 my time, listening to the crackling of the wood stove and looking at let's see if I can show you some of it. Oh my gosh, I got so much. I went to my mom's yesterday and I don't know if I have a single one I can show you. Let's see. There we go. So she sent me home with 3 flats of celery and lettuce and what else did she send me with? Basil, tatsoi, all sorts of things that I need to get into the greenhouse today. So I thought if I came on and did my live stream really early before the kids got up, there would be less interruption, there'd be less noise, and I could think a little clearer. Hey, Village Steader. So, yeah, I wanted to talk about fat today, about how to store your fat, what kinds of fat to get, and the quantity to get. A lot of people have digestive issues with certain fats. So if you know you have a certain fat that you don't get along with, don't buy it. I know that sounds like a no-brainer, but sometimes when I'm in like emergency mode, I start to look at things and think, oh, I should experiment a little bit. Maybe it won't make me sick this time. That's not the way to think when you have your food store. So we have, I don't know how many different kinds of oil we keep, but a lot of people do well with coconut oil. We keep coconut oil on hand for oil pulling. If you have a tendency towards cavities, if you have a tendency towards mouth sores, things like that, I get blisters really easily. And coconut oil can be a way to have good mouth hygiene. And it has been purported to actually heal damaged teeth. I know for me, I had a really bad run-in with the dentist in my early 20s, and he ground down the surface of my teeth, the chewing surface of my teeth, because he was fixing my bite. But he was making a lot of money and he had me come back 4 times. And he ground down the surface of my teeth so badly that I couldn't chew for years afterwards. In order to be able to chew, I had to drink goat's milk or I had to eat butter or something. The lipids protected the surface of my teeth so that I could chew. However, when I found oil pulling, which is that you swish the oil in your mouth for 20 minutes and then you spit it out. And whatever that does, I don't know why it works, but now my teeth are healed and I actually had enamel grow back on my teeth. At the same time, I was drinking raw cow's milk or goat's milk. And I have actually seen miracles with good types of fat in healing things you wouldn't think were healable. Good nutrition goes so far. So coconut oil, not for high fat frying, better for cool applications. You can use coconut oil in soaps. You can use coconut oil in lotions. You can use coconut oil to get rid of lice. If you get exposed to lice or there's some other kind of skin parasite, if your child has lice in their hair, what you do is you put coconut oil in their hair and you just leave it in for like 3 days. And it kills everything. It smothers them. So good oil. And this one doesn't smell bad. So if you put it on your hair, it's very helpful. Hey, Lori. Hey, Homestead. I'm glad it's helpful. I'm amazed this morning at how much easier it is for me to pay attention without having my kids in and out. So a lot of people like coconut oil, and it's very good for cosmetic purposes as well. I'm trying to think if there's anything else with this one. All right. My next one is avocado oil. Avocado oil is a good replacement for butter in actual application onto food, as if it was butter. It works just fine as a cooking oil too. I don't remember if this one is high heat. This one is high heat, but you can also put it on like baked potatoes and it tastes like butter on a baked potato, but it's more shelf stable than butter. And so we really enjoy coconut oil. Another one that we like is grape seed oil. We use that mostly for baked goods, or not baked goods. What would you call that? Quick breads, like waffles. We use grapeseed oil in waffles. The avocado oil we like, again, as more of a lovely tasting replacement for butter in eating on maybe potatoes or something else. And I think we get ours from Costco. We go through quite a bit of it because Paige likes to make our grain-free waffles, and they're very good. And it's the cooking oil we use in it. All right, next one is animal fat. This one is from my pigs or my ducks. I'm not sure which. But when we cook something and it has a lot of fat on it, we save the fat. This must be lard. Okay, so this isn't even ours. Let me go back a little bit. So our local butcher has big blocks of lard, and we buy it, and we use it when we cook fried rabbits. And after we have fried in it, I strain it through a strainer into a warm, very, very important that you're putting warm oil into a warm jar. So I will take my jar and put it on the cooktop and let the jar warm up before I strain into the jar. So this is our deep fat frying lard. Again, make sure the jar has warmed up before you touch it to anything hot. You don't want your glass jars to have extreme temperatures because they'll break. And then you lose all your fat because you'll get glass shards in your fat. So we have our own lard, and then we have our store-bought lard. We do both. It stores really well in the fridge. Oil is very easy that way. And to a certain degree, it will store in cool temperatures in your basement. But you want to be careful about how you store it and check on it frequently if you're going to store it in the basement. In places like the South, I know it's a struggle to keep your basements cool enough because your ground temperatures aren't as cool as ours are. For information on that, make sure to go see Danny and Wanda at Deep South Homestead. They have a lot more information on that. You can lard. You can fat, and I do. And we save it for like fire starter, or we save it for other applications or for deep fat frying. If I'm going to render it and use it in a jar rather than just using it next to the stove for easy, fast use, if I'm going to store it in large quantities, having been rendered, I will bring it up to a high temperature before I actually put it in anything. Does that make sense? Because it's been in a jar. Sometimes you get juices in it when you do your lard. You'll have a little bit of a leftover moisture. That's what goes rancid. That's what goes bad. It's not the fat necessarily that goes bad. It's moisture that got left in. And so in order to keep that from being unsafe, what I'll do is anytime I bring out my home canned fat, my home canned lard, I will bring it up to a high temperature for a few minutes before I start to do anything with it. Even if I'm going to be using it for baking, I'll bring it up to a high temperature, scoop out the amount I need, let it solidify, and then use it. And that way I know that there wasn't any liquid that was in it that could have caused botulism or anything. And by bringing up to a high temperature for a little bit. I've never had botulism in any of my stuff, but sometimes I get a little paranoid. All right. The next thing is my goat's milk. So we can make butter from our goat's milk. And if you do that, you need to have a cream separator. Cows are a little bit easier because it separates out faster. Sheep also separate out faster. But if you're going to make butter out of your homemade or home milked goat's milk, you want a cream separator. And with a cream separator, you have to run it through warm. You can't take cold milk out of the fridge and then run it through a cream separator. You have to take it directly from the animal, run it through a cream separator, and then keep your cream, make your butter. My favorite way to make butter is to put it in the blender. And with goat's milk, you have to be kind of careful because in cow's milk, like the cream is yellow, so you can see the butter after it is made. Whereas with goat's milk, it's white on white. And so when the butter turns into butter, you can't really tell because it's white. Thanks, Amy. Hi, how are you? Good. Do you want to go get dressed? Or do you want to wait for him to do his business and take him back down? Okay. So when you do cream from goats in a blender, it'll look like foam on the top of the buttermilk. And that foam is actually the butter. We don't do this very often. We have so many other sources of fat. Pardon me. We have so many other sources of fat that we just drink our milk. When real normal store-bought butter goes on sale in the grocery store, we buy a box of it, not like a little box of it, a big 30-count box of it. And we don't go through a whole lot of butter anymore because we have our animal fats. But it is nice to have this on hand, just, in case you want to use it. We just stick the whole big box in the freezer and pull it out as we need it. And a 30-count box goes 6 months, sometimes a year, depending. So what else? Other fats and oils you can get are apricot seed oil and jojoba oil and other things like that. And you can experiment with making soap. You can experiment with making lotions. And you can experiment with making herbal tincture type. Not tincture, wrong word is tincture. Herbal, not poultices, it's ointments, herbal ointments, things like that. And the way that they have prepared those plant and seed oils makes them shelf stable in a way that maybe animal fat isn't shelf stable. But you don't want to eat all of them. Like jojoba oil and apricot seed oil aren't really meant to be eaten. And so they're more of like a skin type application. You don't really need fat or oil for your animals. Most animals don't like to eat a lot of fat. Like if you have something that you butchered and you leave the innards out for your animals to eat, usually they'll avoid the fat for the most part. It's a little concentrated for them. A little bit of fat goes a long way. However, that doesn't mean we shouldn't eat it. Most animals don't spend as much time moving and working at the intense levels that we move and work, especially if you're in a situation without electricity. Fat, small amounts of fat regularly keep us able to work hard. And so that's one of the reasons that we store a lot of fat. That and a little bit goes such a long way that you don't really have to store that much. We might store 4 of these for the year. So 4 avocado oils. We'll get maybe 2 big bricks of professionally rendered lard for deep fat frying. And then we have, that one was one we strained, so I can't really use that as a, we have the fat that's in our bacon. And as we cook the bacon, we take that fat and put it into a little can next to the stove, and we use that to cook everything else that needs to be cooked. And lard is amazing. Duck fat is amazing. They're really, really good, especially if you grew them at home. Another fat that's really great is lamb fat. If you're not grain feeding them, our lamb fat, you cannot tell that it's lamb fat, and it's beautiful and it's white. And it's we have this massive bag of lamb fat because I let my lambs get a little bit too fat last year. And the other thing is that our 2-year-old sheep taste as nice as 6-month-old lambs, and it's because of our pasture and our hay, and we're not graining them a lot. And also they're stress-free. You wouldn't believe the difference it makes in the quantity. You wouldn't believe the difference that it makes in the quality and the flavor of your meat when your animals are not afraid at butcher time. I know that seems crazy, but an animal that is afraid puts out stress hormones in its blood. And I have found that when I have witnessed other people butchering animals and they were terrified or in pain, the meat didn't taste good afterwards. It tasted bad. It wasn't something you wanted to eat. And so we have found that by butchering our own animals, making it very, very fast, very, very pain-free, that our meat, lamb doesn't taste like what you think of as lamb or mutton. It tastes sweet and it tastes calm because the animal is calm. our rabbits don't taste bad. Our rabbits don't taste gamey. They taste savory. Our pork tastes not like pork. What does our pork taste like? Maybe nuts. It's very mellow meat. It has good feelings coming off of it. It has good nutrition going into us because the animals are not afraid when we butcher them. All right, let's see who I missed. KM said good morning. Village Setter said, I have never used tallow, but in April we're getting half a beef with the suet and fat from the whole beef as my brother doesn't want it. Have you ever used tallow? I have used tallow. It makes everything taste like hamburger. But that doesn't mean don't keep it. We use it a lot in treats for the chickens in the winter, but a little bit goes a really long way. You can take grain and put it into muffin tins and then pour the melted tallow over the top, and it's suet. If that makes sense, the birds like it. There's a limit to how much they can eat, but they do like it. KM said, love avocado oil in homemade mayo. Yeah, it's a good thing to have on hand. We really, really like the avocado oil. Christy said, hello, good morning. Village Setter said, yes, avocado oil is awesome. Jesus Loving Homestead said, good morning. Love is Hope, good morning. Jesus Loving Homestead said, great information. Love is Hope said, yesterday I was at the grocery store and was going to pick up avocado. It is now $12 for a 16-ounce bottle. Isn't that something? Oh, that was something I wanted to tell you guys about. There are books that will teach you how to preserve your food, even your meat, without refrigeration. One of those ways is called confit. How do you say it? CONFIT. And what it is you cook your food, you cook your meat, and then you pour rendered fat over the top of it. And the fat is similar to a canning method in that it keeps air and bacteria out. And it's called potted meat is another way of saying it. And they used to do it a lot. I don't know what the shelf stability is on it, but what we find with our fatty meat and what we find with our fatty animals is that sometimes refrigeration is overrated. And I know that sounds gross to a lot of people, but with meat, the way that you prepare it, with fat, the way that you prepare it, and then if you can get to it soon enough, it doesn't go bad. Like what we do at night is if we have a roast that was in the Instant Pot and we didn't get it all eaten and I don't have room in the fridge, what we'll do is we'll take the whole Instant Pot, leave the lid on, we'll take it out and put it in the garage because our nights are still cold until June almost. And so the cold concrete floor and the cold basement, does it bring it down to the same temperature as the fridge? No. But it does bring it down cold enough that I can bring it up again in the morning, get it separated out into jars when I'm not so tired. I have the fat in one jar. I have the bone broth from that roast, so the drippings and the juice in another jar. And then I put the meat in another jar and I put the potatoes in another jar. I keep them all separate. And that way they don't get soggy. And I can use them in different meals differently. The potatoes that were with the pot roast, I use them for hash browns the next day. The meat that was the pot roast gets used in stir fry the next day. So it's fast food. It gives me fast food. And then the broth that came off the roast is used in a soup, maybe for dinner. And so I separate them all out. But just going out and making sure there's a good lid on it, putting it in the garage and letting it sit in the garage overnight. Again, it doesn't get as cold as the fridge, but it doesn't need to. It's cooked. It has a little bit of shelf stability overnight. And the more research you can do about these old-timey preservation methods, the more confident you start to feel about using things like fat for preservation. For instance, if you have some kind of liquid vegetable oil or seed oil, when you can take your tomatoes in your growing season and you can crush them and you can actually ferment them on the countertop until it's alive. And that's one that actually doesn't require salt. You can take tomatoes and mush them and wait for them to start to ferment in a particular way. And when they're there, all you do is strain it through a strainer and then you pour oil on the top and it's shelf stable because it's fermented and you can use it to make pasta sauces and things like that, you didn't can it. It didn't have to be exposed to high heat. I have a book. I wonder where I put my book. Preserving Without Canning or Sugar. I think that's what it's called. Preserving Without Canning or Sugar. It's a great book, and it teaches you all these old-fashioned ways of doing things that don't require refrigeration. And a lot of them are like in hot areas. They're like from the Mediterranean or France, places where their temperature is significantly higher than mine is. All right, let's see if I missed any. Okay, Chrissy said, yeah, I would think going off to the butcher would make the animals very stressed. Yes, it stresses them out greatly. And you don't always get the same meat back. I mean, I know they say you get the same meat back, but you don't always get the same meat back. Even just recently that happened to my neighbor. And the reason he knew that was because of the kind of cow he sent in. It should have had white fat. And the meat that he got back had yellow fat. Should not have had yellow fat. It was the wrong kind of cow. And so all this time and effort they put into it, they didn't get back the same cow. And so since the quarantine, since all that happened over the last 2-3 years, what are we at? 2 years now. A lot of times you can't get your animals into the butcher, and it has put a lot of people off of raising animals, because when you're raising a really big animal, sometimes it's very difficult to do it on your homestead. But for those of you who are interested, the best source of information, in my opinion, is Farmstead Meat Smith, Brandon Sheard. Farmstead Meat Smith. And he just moved from British Columbia to Tulsa, Oklahoma area, where we were, which I think is super cool. And he does classes, he does presentations, he has beautiful videos, and he has his own membership where you get to listen to his podcast, you get to see his videos. John and I went to one of his classes in Mapleton, Utah. How many years ago? Almost 10 years ago. And it made a huge difference in our confidence in being able to butcher a medium-sized animal ourselves. We have butchered 250-pound pigs, just the girls and I. And when John wasn't here, because he was still in another city working there. So it gave us the capacity to butcher something that was a couple 100 pounds. That being said, we prefer an animal that has more fat on it and that is smaller, because we really, really value the fat, for one thing. We really value the flavor of the meat when it has more fat. And we value doing smaller animals because then it's easier to get the whole animal processed safely, and we don't have to have massive freezers in order to be able to store the animal if we decide to do a fresh processing rather than a salted processing. Let's see. Cam said, so you feel like lard has less carryover flavor than tallow? It depends on your animal. It depends on how you process it. Beef tallow, as opposed to pork lard, it just has a more recognizable flavor of beef when you're done. Tallow does. That doesn't mean it's bad. That doesn't mean it's not good. It works. Tallow is very good for like conditioning leather. It's very good for conditioning leather. Lard, I prefer to use in my cooking. It has a very, very high, lovely heating point, like smoking point. I love cooking with lard. It's so easy, and you don't have things stick. I love cooking with lard. With sheep fat, our last sheep has a very lovely fat, and we don't notice any muttony flavor to it. But traditionally, sheep fat would have been used more for candles. And so you can make candles out of sheep fat. Just know that it has a melting point. It's still animal fat. And so we would make candles out of it in jars rather than trying to get like a candlestick, because animal fat does melt very easily. And I just found that our candles turned out better if they were in a jar rather than trying to get them to stand up. Versatech said, I vacuum seal my lard as I don't have a freezer, and I'm using that lard well over a year, and it's perfect. Yes, at least a year. The tallow that we found that we felt like it went rancid, had been there for many years. But it was still just fine for deep fat frying because you get it up to a certain point. And when you heat it up to be ready for deep fat frying, anything that's in it, dies because it's pretty hot. And to some people that may gross them out, but I just don't worry about it. I'm just not worried about it. The freshness of your meat and your fat, when you start to render it, makes a massive difference. We have taken fat from someone who had not got it in, it hadn't processed quite right. Honey, can you come get the dog so he's not scratching, please? Just run him out. Run him out. He needs to go run. I may have to cut this short, guys. The family has arisen. So we had a half of a side pork and then a whole bunch of chunks of fatty bits from a friend that was moving. And their freezer had not kept the meat warm enough. Their freezer had not kept the meat and the honey. I don't think any of the gates are closed. Yeah, you better run. Don't run to the front of the property. Walk slowly and just don't let him know that it's open, okay? What was I saying? They had started, the meat didn't go into the freezer and cool fast enough. That's another thing with home butchery is one of the reasons I love to have so much salt on hand is because it allows you to take the time you need to get it into the freezer, if that's what you choose to do, or to get it smoked. Salt is pulling moisture out of meat and fat, which moisture is the enemy of preservation in these situations. You want the moisture to be pulled out. And so you can salt things for even just a few hours, and it's like refrigeration as long as you're not out in high heat and as long as there's air flowing. If you put it in a Rubbermaid and you put the lid on with salt, then there's no air flowing. So you better have cold weather to put it outside. You can put it in a Rubbermaid with the lid on and put it out in really cold weather. In really warm weather, when you salt things, you need the air to be moving. You want air as soon as possible. But the salt itself will preserve it pretty well, even in warm weather. Just, yeah, you need to get a book. You need to read Farmstead, or you need to go see Farmstead Meatsmith. Education. Because there's different parameters for different situations, different weather, different salt, different meat. You just have to educate yourself on it. It's very simple once you understand it, and you can really tell if you need to add more salt or if you need more open air or if you need to close the container. You figure that out with experience. But what I was saying is with home butchery, if you have a massive animal that you're butchering and you're intending to put it directly in the freezer, you're going to have spoilage. The reason for that is that your freezer can only keep up with so much warm food. And when it comes straight from an animal, it's warm. So what you do when you butcher is that you do all your butchering, removing the innards, your cleanup, and then you hang your animal overnight somewhere that predators, scavengers, things like that can't get into it. For us, that's our smokehouse. We built it out of secondhand lumber around a gazebo. It has really good airflow, little slats to keep air flowing. And so you hang it overnight. You could also hang it in a garage. You could hang it in a barn, just make sure cats and things can't get to it. Hang it overnight, and what happens is that your animal starts to dry out. The air flowing around the animal starts to pull the moisture out of it, and it starts to dry out. And as it dries out, it cools. The temperature of the animal drops significantly to the ambient air temperature. And even if you have high temperatures outside, you still need to be able to hang that animal and get some of that moisture out and cool the carcass before you start to cut it up. What you do is that once you start to cut it up, you put the meat not touching each other in your freezer. If you already have some frozen food in the freezer, so much the better. Don't pack warm meat on top of warm meat. You spread it out in your freezer and you let it cool, which is why it's really nice to have lots of salt, because if you can only get half of your pig into the freezer, you can salt the other half and it's not a problem. You get it salted, you get it hung, you start smoking it. A lot of times we'll smoke it for like 3 to 5 days, and it starts to preserve it. And if you do it at the right time of year, which is also critical, if you do it in the winter, then you don't have to worry about insects, and you can keep it cool enough that you give it time to cure. It's not that the temperature is essential, it's about the time period it takes for it to cure, that you're not getting bugs and things in it, if that makes sense. Let's see. Love is hope. Oh, they're talking about food shortages. So here locally, even in Idaho, one thing that has happened is that feed prices have gone up 35% in the last little bit. Very expensive to buy feed. So I have a year's worth of food storage for my animals, and my animals are my food storage. I do have a little bit of food storage in the house, but we can't eat dry goods, and so most of our food storage is on the hoof. But we did John and I went in for a date the other night, and when we went out to eat, there was a sign at the front of the store that said, due to inflation, we can no longer afford chicken. We can no longer afford to buy chicken. And so that restaurant has just stopped serving chicken. And they were also very short on beef. And here's something to make you guys feel maybe a little bit happier. I was watching a cooking video on YouTube a little while ago about third world countries or second world countries, just not first world countries, but countries where people don't have as much glamour and glitz as what we have. I'm not going to say we live better, because I don't think we do. I think we pay dearly for our glamour and our glitz. But there was a massive amount of meat in these countries that people regularly eat. A lot of meat. They eat a lot of fresh vegetables, a lot of fresh fruit, and the food is a priority there. And this was in Mexico, and the massive amounts of meat that you could get for very inexpensive prices, $1 for a really big plate of food, and maybe $2 for a big plate of food with lots of meat on it. And that here in the United States, a lot of times meat is incredibly expensive. And I look at how much we meat and how much fat and how much abundance we have on our homestead, and that I'm actually trying to cut back now on how many animals I have, because I can't fit them all in the freezer. And the way that I did that was by not buying small amounts of feed. I bought large amounts of feed, and I have everything on hand that's a tool to turn that animal into something my family can use. And over time, what's happened is that what I used to do is, as soon as I would butcher something, I would purchase something that was new to be butchered again in 6 months. And so I was on a 6-month rotation. I would buy a pig at the same time as I butchered a sheep. And in 6 months, I would butcher that pig. And then at the time that I butchered the pig, I would purchase a lamb. And so every 6 months, something pretty significant was going into the freezer. And that was when I was purchasing my animals. So now that I'm not purchasing my animals, and instead we're breeding our animals, not only do we have those animals to eat at the appropriate time, but I also have extra to sell to somebody else. And then that money that came from selling that extra animal goes into paying for the next animal or feed. It goes into whatever equipment I need to put it into. This year, those animals paid for fencing and feed. Let's see. Jean Miller said, my mother preserved sausage that way when we were kids. I'm 72 now, and I've always wondered why that sausage didn't spoil. Now I know. Is that for how you cook the sausage and then you pour the fat over it? Is that the one you're talking about? Stone Throw Acre said, hello, good to see everybody here. Glad I'm able to catch the live again. Yeah, me too. All right. Okay, let's see. Village Sitter said, here in Western New York, I have only seen where saltines were all sold out. Crackers? Yeah, I don't know about supply chains and why one thing is available. Sometimes, like in the instance of this restaurant, the chicken was too expensive for them to buy and then be able to sell it at a profit. So people would not be willing to buy the food that they were selling at the price that they had to put the food in order to be able to buy the chicken, if that makes sense. That's why that worked that way. It wasn't that they couldn't get chicken, it's that they couldn't sell the chicken at a price that people would buy later after they cooked it. Christy Beth said, never knew fat could be used for preservation. Yes, fat works very well for preservation of meat. And these kind of oils work very well for the preservation of vegetables. Isn't that interesting? Preserving without canning or sugar. I think that's what it's called. It's a great book. But on top of that, if you're going to do those things, you need to have salt on hand. So I know that was the first video I made was about salt. I have a lot of salt. I have a lot of different salts. I have cheese salt. I have kimchi salt, which is for like preserving vegetables. I have iodized salt and I have uniodized salt. You can't use iodized salt in cheese. If you use iodized salt in cheese, it'll kill your culture in your cheese. And it's the wrong texture. And so one of the things I just purchased was I made sure that I was topped up on all my cultures for my cheeses, that I'm topped up on my salt for my cheeses, and that I have all the special equipment I need for the particular goat cheeses that my family really likes, which is croton. It's Crottin. It's like a blue cheese, or not a blue cheese. It's like a brie, except it's so easy to make. If you can make yogurt, you can make this cheese, but it turns into like a brie. So good. And then mozzarella. So I have lots of citric acid, and I also have thermophilic starts, whether I want to do a long process mozzarella or a short process mozzarella. And the book that I use is by Ricky Carroll from New England Cheese Company. Very good book. All right. Spring Meadows said, hello, everyone. I don't have much time here, but always good information from the channel. Thank you so much. Village Setter said, I was wondering about the candle thing. I know I would never get through all that tallow, but I could share it or barter it with people I know. Yes. And again, it's really great for leather preservation, leather conditioning. You smell like hamburger when you use it. So your dogs really like your shoes, but it does a great job at keeping things soft. Also, we use tallow for fire starting. When we have our wood burning stove in the winter, we soak our kindling in it, or we put it on an old piece of cotton and use it as fire starter. Works very well. Oh, our puppy thinks he needs to come in. Maybe I better go. Village Setter said, I'm into sharing as I've been blessed with lots of produce to share. Did Kaya come in? Kaya? Paige? Can you let the puppy in? He knows that you abandoned him. Our dog doesn't like to go outside unless we go with him. Christy Beth said, what kind of salts preserve the meat? So you can use pretty much any salt. Iodized salt, I don't know how the iodized salt works with that, because my understanding is that, oh my gosh, I have a chin here. That's a first. Getting old. What was I saying? My understanding is that iodized salt will kill certain bacteria that you want to have. With salt preservation, you're encouraging lactofermentation, which is a bacteria that likes salt, and it kills all the other bacteria. And so if you have iodine or iodide, is it iodide or iodine? If you have that in with your salt, you could kill your salt-loving bacteria. And so we don't use iodized salt for our meat, which when you cure with salt on meat, it's still lactofermentation. It's still, because you got salt on it, a certain bacteria is going to be in your meat, but it's kind of like yogurt, meat yogurt. Whereas with yogurt, you've got a different kind of bacteria that likes milk and certain temperatures. Isn't that interesting? We're so blessed. The world is an amazing place with so much bountiful life. All right, Christy said, I really like meat. Rice and beans can get old. I love meat too, and I don't function without it, and that's why our food storage is on the hoof. We do have 1, 2, 3 freezers full of meat. We had 2 more freezers and we somehow managed to get them all into the 3 freezers by eating a lot of meat here for a little while. And we've got like a brick on top of one of the freezers to try and keep it shut. I feel the blessing of the bounteous harvest. This last year we butchered 4 pigs. John did 2 really big commercial type pigs. They were Duroc and Hamp that he did for sausage. And I did 2 little lard pigs. And what we find is what we want to eat is the little lard pigs. They have lots of really good fat on them. The fat is delicious. And we really prefer it to the lean pork of the commercial pigs. And then we had a sheep that we butchered, plus an awful lot of ducks and turkeys and chickens and quail. And our neighbor brings us fresh fish. So I feel like homesteading is a process rather than a destination. We've always had a lot of meat going into the freezer, but I have not always been as good at keeping costs down, if that makes sense. Over time, you really develop a feel for when you need to get a new animal ready to be butchered. You get a feel for when you need to sell your animals. You get a feel for when you need to buy new feed. And as long as you stay ahead of it, and as long as you make sure that your food is actually going into your freezer, don't ever sell your meat, don't ever sell your produce until your own fridge is full. Because if your own calorie needs are not met, those dollars don't help you at all. You can't function without enough calories. And so food going into our mouths is the most important thing, making sure it actually makes it into your belly. For American people, eat will be problem. In what case? I think that for the United States, our problem is the types and the quantities of food that we eat. I don't think most people realize just how many calories you need in order to grow your own food, and the quality of food that you need in order to keep working that hard. Right now, we're working flat out as fast and as hard as we can because Paige is in spring break. She's taking a welding class and an automotive class at the local high school. And so she's not around to help as much. She's not actually in the public school, but she's taking individual classes there. And so she's not here as often. And so I'm down by one set of hands. And so Kai and I are eating a lot right now to keep up with our calorie needs. And fat and meat, I think, are essential for that in order to have longevity, to keep working and not feel like you're hungry all the time and not be snacking all the time. Jennifer said, man is like 6 a.m. there. Good morning. Yes, well, it's 7 now. I started at about 6:30. I've been up since like 5:30 with all this good sunshine. My circadian rhythms are happier. Abundantly Blessed Home said, that is brilliant. We eat mainly grain-free. Never thought of stocking up on grains for my animals instead. Thanks for the tip. Yes, that's exactly what I do. I have food storage for a year for my animals when I can. I like to be at least 6 months out. That's my minimum. But on hay, I like to be at least a year out because it stores well. On grain, I like to be at least 6 months ahead, but I prefer a year ahead. If you're in the South, that can be a problem. Deep South Homestead with Danny and Wanda, they have a lot more information on being in the South, somewhere humid, and trying to store feed. If you're in the South and you can't store a lot of feed, make sure to make best friends with your local farmers who are providing you with your hay and your grain. Make sure to get things as local as possible so that if roadways had something going weird or if we couldn't get feed from overseas, make sure your local farmer feels supported by you. Pay him an honest price so that he's happy to see you coming. Let's see. Jean said, yes, it's preserving the sausage patties and the fat. Yeah. And I think that's called confit, C-O-N-F-I-T. And they'd call it jug meat or pot meat, and they put it in there. You cook the animal, and then you put it in a jug that's been sterilized, and then you pour the fat over it, and then you cover it, and you put it in your cold storage, not your fridge, but your cold storage like your root cellar. And it's like canning, but you don't can it. All right. Hey, Andrew, how are you? Stone's Throw said, looking for a multi-purpose cheese press. Any ideas? So on New England Cheese Company, they have a little one that I think is like $130, and that's the one that I have. It's really nice to have the drip tray that comes with it, but you have to really search for it to find it. I don't like to do hard cheeses. My goat's milk doesn't like it very much. Your temperatures on your goat's milk need to be way lower, like way lower than cows when you're making cheese. So far, all of our aged cheeses that are hard cheeses that we've made have turned out just that hard. You can make something similar to Parmesan, but I have yet to have a nice, moist goat cheese that was hard and aged. We've done much better with our bloomy rind cheeses that don't need to be pressed, and also with mozzarella, or just making cheese curds. So cheese curds are just cheese that hasn't been pressed, and it'll stay good in the fridge for a week, and we think it's delicious. It's so good. It melts really nicely. But even with mozzarella from goat's milk, you don't want the temperatures very high. You want to keep the temperatures really low, or else you lose all of your is it protein? It just breaks, and then it doesn't stretch. It doesn't melt. So when we make mozzarella, we bring it up to like 88, or is it 83? And then we just stir it lightly at that temperature. We never bring it up to temperature in the vat. We work it warm. I mean, we really had to be careful with the goat's milk. Yeah, but Stone's Throw Acres, look up New England Cheese Company. They have everything that I use. I love them to pieces. Christy said she's 65 and she has several chin hairs. Yeah, that's a new one. I'm feeling it. I'm feeling my age. All right. Barns Raised by Jesse. Same here. Multiple chin skirts. Not old. Just leveling up. I'm leveling up. I like that. Tony Renee, hello. Love His Hope said, should we be buying salt without anti-cake? Yes. Get it as pure as you possibly can. And buy multiple kinds of salt. You want a different kind of salt for, well, I don't know. I like real legitimate kimchi salt. It's kind of like rock salt, but it feels kind of greasy in your fingers. It's really good. So I have like a big 5-pound bag of kimchi salt. I have a big 5-gallon or 5-pound jug of cheese salt. It's much finer and it doesn't have iodine in it, but it's like flaked. Cheese salt is flaked. And then we have 2 25-pound bags of iodized salt. And then I have kosher salt, canning and pickling salt. And then out in my garage, I have a 50-pound bag of mineral salt for each one of the animals that I have. So I have sheep and goats can't share the same minerals. Well, the goats can have the sheep minerals, but the sheep can't have the goat minerals. So I have special dairy minerals, 50 pounds, which will last me for like 3 years. And then I have 50 pounds for the sheep, which will last me for like 3 years. And then I have the special minerals for the pigs. And I think that's it. Oh, and then I also have actual salt blocks that are regular salt, not just the minerals. And yeah, because you really want them. If you don't have enough selenium in your salt, you end up with white muscle disease in your baby animals, your baby ruminants. They're born lethargic. So make sure you have the right salt for your location. My goat salt, my goat minerals are pre-mixed specifically for my soil, which is, a big deal. Okay. Mary said, do you know how to get out of upgrading phone to 5G? I don't have a cell phone anymore. I share a very, very old cell phone with my kids. I don't use it for Wi-Fi. I use it strictly as a phone, and it's not a dumb phone. It's an old iPhone, but we don't upgrade it. You can get it. I think you can get just a dumb phone. I don't use a cell phone for any kind of internet use, and the reason for that is because I'm addicted to technology, and when I have a cell phone, I'll sit and watch YouTube videos about homesteading all day instead of going out and homesteading all day. And so the only time I'm allowed to be on internet is if I'm on an actual computer and I'm finished with my work for the day. I can't have it on a phone. So I'm not as up to date on that kind of thing as I could be. Hi, honey. How are you? Am I lying about anything? Does it sound like? Oh, okay. I have a chin hair. No. Maybe. All right. So let's see. Hey, Sandra, how are you? So good to see you. David said, how do you protect your storage grain from rodents? So we put it up on a pallet. No matter what it is, we put it up on a pallet. And we have farm cats, but we also have velociraptor chickens. Right?
Yeah.
We have velociraptor chickens. One of the places that we used to have problems with mice was in the greenhouse because I would be feeding the quail out there. The quail lived in the greenhouse in the winter, and the mice would come in and they would eat the grain from the quail, and then they would get up into my hotbeds and they would eat all my seeds out of my hotbeds. So what we did is we made a special little gate that would allow the cats to get in to eat the mice. That was 1 year. And we just put bird netting over the hotbed so the cats couldn't get up and poop in it. But then the second year, what we did is we just started putting all the birds in the greenhouse in the winter. And the chickens will take out after those mice. They will attack them. And so I have never had a problem with mice in the greenhouse again. I don't have a problem with mice anywhere on the property because the cats and the chickens keep them killed. But that being said, I always put my grain up on a pallet, and usually there's enough spillage from when the kids go out to get grain for the animals that there's a little bit of grain around the perimeter of the tote. And so if there were mice, they would most likely be more interested in eating what was out on the ground rather than getting into the tote. But having the right animals on your farm to help with those kind of problems is a pretty big deal. We do not overfeed our cats. We underfeed our cats, and then they need to go look for mice. We do feed them, especially in the winter. We do feed them a little bit. They get milk from the goats, and they get the innards, the guts from like rabbit butchering, that kind of thing. But it's sporadic, and that means that they have to stay a little bit hungry, so they're more interested in mice. All right, Jesus Loving Homesteader says, so much great information. My book cart is growing. So much to learn about meat storage. Yes. And what we found is that a lot of times it's just fear. And it's just a process. It's just a skill. It's not, you don't have to be an expert on it to do it right. That's why Farmstead Meatsmith. That's why Farmstead Meatsmith is so great, is because you see him do it, you hear him explain it, and you can even take classes. You can even pay to have him come to your homestead and butcher your pigs. And you can invite people, and they pay a ticket price to be there. What was it for us to go? Like $150 between the two of us to go?
Something.
Caveat,
that was over a decade ago.
It was over a decade ago. When we went, he had different tiers. If you wanted hands-on with the pig to butcher it, it cost more. If you wanted to just observe, what's the word for that? Observation. What did they say about it when it's an audit? If you want to just audit the class and not actually participate, you want to stand back. I think for the two of us, it cost like $150 to go. It was a fantastic class, and it was over 2 days. The first day, you kill the animal and get it cleaned and hang it. The second day, you go in and you start cutting the animal up and salting it. And he makes it so simple. He doesn't use nitrates. I don't use nitrates. I just use salt. I like to do a salt with a little bit of sugar, black pepper, and garlic. Those are the 4 ingredients I use in my cure. And I don't cure it for very long. For me, I only cure it for like a day and a half because that's where I like the flavor to be. I don't like having to soak my bacon. And then we smoked it for like a week. Yeah, cold smoke. Jesus Living Homesteader. Yes, my cart with my books in it is always full. I just got a book talking about how to coppice your poplars and your willows to create your own biofuel, which I think is fantastic. Abe Books is a great place to get used books if you don't like Amazon. Their prices were actually very competitive against Amazon. Abe, A-B-E, Abe Books. And so I'm trying really hard to get my books not from Amazon, even though I don't think there's anything evil necessarily about Amazon. I think they're a great capitalist venture. At the same time, it's nice when one company doesn't own the world, you know? Barn Raised by Jesse said, we use old freezers and barrels to keep rodents out here, but if there were other better options, would love to hear them. When we were having problems with rodents, we did use 50-gallon drums for sure. And 50-gallon drums work great. but we don't, traps are great. Traps are helpful if you can't let chickens in your garage. Let's see. Book recommendations for goat milk uses is how to make cheese, etc. That would be by Ricky Carroll. I think it's Carroll. Ricky Carroll. She's the one. I love you.
Love you. Bye, everybody.
Did Dad try it?
I think he'd think it.
Ooh, it's sweet.
Girly, but it's sweetie and a little banana.
It's super sweet.
It's like a little banana.
I don't think it tastes like banana. I think it's just sweet.
Very sweet.
Very sweet. Oh, that's exciting. Is that frost or is that kyanite?
I think that was probably a mix of kyanite and.
That's the sweetest we've ever had. Yeah, that's pretty exciting. We may have to buy that goat. We're borrowing goats because we have a friend that we're raising lambs for, and she can't raise lambs, so she loaned us goats. What were we talking about? Okay, Ricky Carroll, New England Cheese Company. The book that they wrote is amazing. There's another book that she has that's just specifically for goat's milk, but I don't remember what it is. And I think my little brother has it. I'll have to look that up. But that's the simplest one I've ever. Do you want to find me the cheese books? See if there's multiple cheese books up there with the recipe books and bring them here so I can show them to him. The illustrator said, we use galvanized metal garbage cans. Yeah, and that works too. When we were in Tulsa and there was a big problem with predation from critters, we just used galvanized metal garbage cans. Exactly. Andrew said sheep aren't supposed to get copper, I believe, in some of the trace mineral salts. I'm not sure what happens with that. So yes, copper is toxic for sheep. That's why I have separate mineral mix for sheep that's specifically for sheep. And then I have a separate mineral mix for the goats. So yes, you're 100% right. No copper for sheep, or very, very tiny amounts of copper. And so any mineral block that you get that you're going to use for sheep, it has to specifically say that it's okay for sheep. However, a lot of mineral blocks don't have selenium in it, and you will get white muscle disease in your babies in utero if you don't have enough selenium. This is it. Okay, so this is the cheese book that I use. It is not specific to goats, but it has goat milk recipe that are specific for goat's milk inside of it. Here, honey. Thank you. So it's Home Cheese Making by Ricky Carroll. And that is from the New England Cheese Company, which is where I get my supplies. I just spent $138 topping up on everything that I know that I already use. No, there's no experimental cultures in that. There's no experimental tools in that. That's just exactly what I need for the next very long time. And the other goat book, that's goat cheese book that I have, I think I got it from their website. And it's just specifically about how to take your cultures and turn them into cultures that continue to be useful rather than having to buy new cultures. All right. Jennifer said, I'm addicted to watching YouTube videos on homesteading all day and not getting out homesteading. Yes, it's a real thing. Hopeful looking for solutions rather than outside making mistakes on your own homestead. But it's so vital to make those mistakes on your homestead and get it out of your system and find your successes. It's just so important to be moving on it, because then your body sees that you're up and moving. It gives you better ideas. It gives you more hope. And you just feel better about yourself when you're actually out doing it. Mary said, my cell phone internet provider keeps blocking my calls so that I upgrade. Oh, I hate that. Kelly to you said, greetings from Belgium. Love these daily chats. Your source of wisdom. You are so kind. Mary said, T-Mobile Sprint redirects my calls to their network. We're having issues with our shared cell phone at this point too. It's all very interesting, isn't it? Hey, Kaylin Strain. Yes, I do mean a Monopoly Traces of Life. Although it feels more like just world ownership at this point, not just a monopoly. Goat milk cheeses are awesome. They are awesome. I am very specific about which ones I like, though. And even though we have a lot of milk right now, I try really hard not to experiment very much. If we like a certain cheese, that's the one I make. And I try not to experiment too much, because up to this point, I've just had too much waste with the hard cheeses. I probably need to sit down and take more notes and make smaller cheeses and figure it out. But we've been making some big cheeses sometimes. And then, the pigs still eat it and it's not a big deal, but, don't like to waste it. Okay, I got to run because we got to go milk. Love you guys. See you later.